Now what we want to do is take a look at how we can modify the output of some of our show commands. Some of our show commands can produce a volume of output, and we have to wade through a lot of extraneous information to find exactly what we need. For example, here on screen, we're doing a show IP interfaces brief command. And while this router doesn't have that many interfaces, we do see that some output is omitted. We're not sure how many interfaces it has, but it's a lot of output. Maybe I'm only interested in the interfaces that have IP addresses assigned. I don't want to have to look at all these unassigned interfaces. What are some ways that we can go through and give our show commands, but filter the information somewhat so that we're not wading through a lot of unnecessary output? Let's go out to a live interface right now, and let's give some show commands and redirect some of that output to some output modifiers. This is very, very powerful. I want to show you several of these output modifiers. First of all, one of my favorite commands in Cisco iOS is show, if I can get my selection. Let's do a show IP interface brief command. And on this router, I'm sitting on router HQ. It's got a fair number of interfaces that you can see. Maybe more information than I want. We've got some unassigned stuff going on there. What about IP routes? We can do a show IP route. It's not like I'm running full BGP routing tables here, but I've got a dozen or so routes. Maybe I want to filter this output a little bit. I don't want to see all this output. Let's take a look at some ways to do that. For example, I notice that I've got some networks that begin with 10.10.30. Maybe I just want to see output for, I just want to see route entries for those networks. Check this out. We can use an output modifier to do that. I can do a show IP route, and I can pipe that to an output modifier. We're going to take a look at several of these output modifiers in this demonstration. One of the most powerful ones, though, is include. And we can use an abbreviation here. We can just say I to include. And I'm going to say that I want to include lines, individual lines in the output that include 10.10.30. I'm taking all the output from show IP route and only including in the output lines that contain 10.10.30. And notice what it does. It gives me a much more concise view than we had previously. That looks much, much better. Let's also go back to this command I showed you earlier. I did a show IP interface brief, and probably my favorite command in all of Cisco iOS, but I'm having to look through the output to find exactly what I'm trying to find. I'm trying to find interfaces that actually have addresses assigned that may or may not be in the up state. But notice all these unassigned interfaces. I'm not interested in those. What can I do? I could do this. I could say show IP interface brief pipe to, instead of include, we could say exclude. I'm going to give an E to say I want to exclude anything that contains the letters UN for unassigned. And that gives me a much cleaner view. I don't have any interfaces showing up that are unassigned. Another output modifier is the begin modifier. For example, let's say that I wanted to look through my running configuration and I wanted to look specifically at my VTY line configuration mode. All right, I could do a show run, and I'm looking for my line VTY, that section where we're setting up for our telnet or secure shell connections. And I'm doing spacebar, spacebar, spacebar. Wow, there's a lot of stuff here. Spacebar, spacebar, on and on and on, screen after screen. Wow, it's way down here. Scrolling, scrolling, scrolling. Finally, we get down to line VTY04. That's what I was trying to find. Had to go through a lot of output to find that. Check this out. What if I did a show run pipe to a B for begin? I want to begin with the first line that says line VTY. And it's going to jump me immediately to that output in the show run config. And then it continues on with the rest of the output. But notice the very first line now is line VTY. That's really nice. Something else that's not obvious, this is not in the curriculum, but it's one I want to add on. Let's say that I'm doing a show run, and I'm right in the midst of a show run. I'm at the more where I hit the space bar if I want another screen. I could do a /, and notice it gives me a little / prompt in the lower left-hand corner of the screen. And maybe I want to jump to the router OSPF configuration section. I could say right here, I could say router OSPF and press enter, and notice it says that it's filtering, and it jumps me immediately to the router OSPF section. If we find ourselves in the middle of a massive show run output and we want to jump to a specific area of that config, / and type in that area of the config. I'll tell you, probably my favorite output modifier is the section modifier. I can do a show run, and let's pipe this to section router OSPF. Here's what I mean by section. It doesn't give me any commands before this or any commands after this. You see, when I go into router configuration mode for OSPF, I've got all these other lines underneath that section that are indented. By using the section output modifier, I see things that are just in that section. It's a very powerful tool. Let's take a look at another one. What if I do a show processes CPU command? This is a really handy command we use with troubleshooting. It's going to give us, let me issue that command again, where it doesn't give me a more command right off the bat. This is going to show us CPU utilization on our router. It's going to give us a 5-second average, a 1-minute average, a 5-minute average, and it gives us page after page after page of processes and their processor utilization. Now, I want to show you the top of this command again. We've got some really useful commands or useful rows up at the top of this output. It tells us what these columns mean. It tells us for the router as a whole what the 5-second, 1-minute, 5-minute performance is. It also tells us what these columns mean. There's the process ID. Here's microseconds. Here's 5 seconds, 1 minute, and so on. If I'm looking for a very specific process, I could do this. We talked about the include command. I could say show processes CPU pipe to include, and I'm looking for the IP input process. And sure enough, it jumps me directly to that process. I get that line of output. Except, I don't know what all those numbers mean. I don't have my headers, my row headers. What we can do is use some Boolean logic and some meta characters to get us additional lines of output. You're going to like this. Let's do a show processes CPU, and let's pipe it to include. Now let's use a meta character. There's a meta character of a caret. That's a shift 6. And a caret meta character means that the line begins with this. And I'm saying that the line begins with CPU, caret CPU. I also want to include in my output a line that begins with a space PID. So I'm going to say, no space here, notice. I'm going to do a pipe, a vertical bar symbol. We call it a pipe symbol. And that's a Boolean OR. And I'm going to say caret space PID. I'm now saying, give me lines that include lines that begin with CPU or begin with space PID, or one more Boolean or include IP input. Notice I didn't put a caret before IP input because the line does not begin with that. It's just somewhere in the line. And look at this. Look at this beautiful output we get. We get our 2 header rows, so I know what all these numbers mean, and we see the numbers for the IP input process.